Everybody make sure you silence your cell phones. Commissioners, when you talk, remember to turn on the mic. I'll go through the roll call. Commissioner Lundvall. Commissioner Jolovich.
Here.
Commissioner Masterson is excused. Commissioner Brokaw.
Here.
Commissioner Roberts.
Here.
Commissioner Bell is excused. I'm Commissioner Ladwig, and we do have a quorum. So if there's members of the public wishing to address the commission on any agenda item, please fill out a comment form located at the registration table and hand one of the department staff in the back of the room there. Tina Smith is assisting with that table, and she will take care of that. If you're on the Zoom, you should have submitted an advanced comment form prior to the start of the meeting. If you would still like to comment on an agenda item, please contact the host of the meeting. There's not too many public in here, but if we're working through the agenda, the public will have the opportunity to address the commission. To ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak, please limit your time. Would you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll go on with item number 14, Deputy Chief Smith.
Good morning, President Ladwig, members of the commission, and Director Nesvik. We have a damage claim appeal for claim number 24103. This is a claim that was submitted on January 23rd of 2024 by the claimant, Mr. John Donnelly, representing Donnelly Farm out of Torrington. He had damage from mule deer to his standing corn that was harvested as a grain corn. The department investigated the claim damage and verified a little over 147 bushels of corn that were impacted by mule deer for a total dollar amount of $902.43. Mr. Donnelly was not happy with the recommended payment that was provided through our investigation and submitted a letter of appeal in the amount of, well, his claim was for the amount of $4,270. So there's a difference of about $3,367 in what the claimant has asked for and what the department's recommendation is. Mr. Donnelly's claim affidavit that was submitted, as I stated, was for the amount of $4,270, and that amount was arrived at by averaging his previous year's claims, 7 years of claims previously, the amount of damage that he had as an average of those 7 years that we had paid in that previous time. So we actually have the harvest, the bushels that were harvested in this claim that he provided, and we have the investigation to determine the amount that we would recommend. Those are the two components that we need to make an investigation award, and to consider the previous year's damages that were awarded as an average across time is not an acceptable method for us to consider, given the fact that we have the vital information being the amount that was actually harvested during this year and the amount of damage that was estimated. I don't believe that Mr. Donnelly is here in person. He's been provided information how to join this meeting by Zoom. I'm not sure if we have anyone on Zoom. So we do not have the claimant on Zoom or in person, but the department would like to go forth with our investigation report for your information.
I'm sure to verify, Mr. Donnelly was notified that this was going to be done today.
Yes, Mr. President, I visited with Mr. Donnelly on the phone, and we've also sent multiple letters. The last, which was received on July 10th, he signed for that certified letter. notifying him of the date and time and the process to request an extension or another meeting to attend. And we've not heard back from him since those times. So he's
Thank you.
been notified. So at this point, I would ask the investigator, the primary investigator for this claim is Torrington Senior Game Warden, Mark Dexter, and he has a PowerPoint for you. Mark.
Good morning. Commission President, Director Nesvik, Commission. My name is Mark Dexter. I'm the Torrington Game Warden. I'm here today to speak to you guys about Mr. Donnelly's damage claim, number 24103.
Mr. President, just real quick while we're waiting for that to load up. Mark jinxed himself a little bit earlier and he said, if anything will go wrong with me involved, it's going to go wrong. So we're evidencing that right now with a little bit of a delay, but hopefully we'll get that squared away.
Mr. President, while that's loading up, in our packet, we have this damage claim summary. Whoever put that together, thank you. That's brilliant. That's great. It's a great idea. It's right there. Claimant's valuation, department valuation, difference, description. Just a snapshot of exactly what, that's great. I'd like to see those.
So we'll start by giving a description of Mr. Donnelly's property. His property is located northwest of Torrington, just outside of town. He has 2 full circle pivots there on his property. As you can see on the picture on the right-hand side, the pivot that we're looking at this year is encircled in red. It's approximately 129.42 acres of field corn that he had, and he's claiming mule deer damage on it. Mr. Donnelly is requesting $4,270 for this year's damage claim. Mr. Donnelly first contacted me on November 4th of 2023 to advise of deer damage. During the conversation, Mr. Donnelly advised me that he'd be starting corn harvest in about 1 week. And that he first seen the deer damage between July 23rd and 25th of 2023. Mr. Donnelly understood that it was a short time period between the time of notification and time of harvest. That he offered just to accept 1% deer damage if I didn't have time to get out to survey his fields. I explained to Mr. Donnelly that we'd get out there and survey it in person. So on November 6th, I emailed Mr. Donnelly the paperwork that's required for his damage process, which included the hunter affidavit, the damage affidavit, and also the damage regulations. During that time, I spoke to Mr. Donnelly. He advised that he no-tilled his corn this year and that he was concerned that there was overpopulation of corn plants in his field. Not knowing much about the corn at the time, I asked him what that would do, and he said that would lower his corn growth out there. He also advised that he wasn't too sure how many hunters he had had on his property last fall. On the same date, I went out to locate these fields. Have never been to his property before. I went out to his cornfield just to see how close it was and kind of get the extent of damage. While I was out there in the northwest corner of his field looking at the corn cobs, I noticed most of the corn cobs were pretty tiny, about half the size of normal corn. So when I spoke to Mr. Donnelly about that, he mentioned it was possibly due to the overpopulation causing smaller ears on his corn. So on November 7th, I was able to get a handful of guys to come help me, myself, Warden Niemeyer, Warden Supervisor Ellsworth, and 2 damage techs or wildlife techs came out and assisted in surveying and taking samples of Mr. Donnelly's field. The photograph there, the picture, that's our Onyx tracks. All the blue lines are where we walked in his cornfield and took samples from. So we got a pretty good survey of his property. While we're there walking, we did see 5 mule deer exit the cornfield to the south. 2 bucks and 3 does exited. So there were deer in there. The types of damage that we seen on Mr. Donnelly's cornfield while we took samples out there and surveyed it. We had bird damage, raccoon damage, some limb damage, mycotoxins or blossom rot, big game damage due to mule deer, that's what's out there, and mechanical vehicle damage. And I'll get into some of these here in just a few minutes. The mechanical damage, the picture you see on the left there, that's where Mr. Donnelly had someone come to fix a pivot tire in the middle of his cornfield. They entered the northwest corner of the cornfield, dropped the bucket of a tractor and just drove through his cornfield. So that's the mechanical damage that we observed. It went out to approximately the center of his cornfield. The one on the right, that's the overpopulation of the corn that I had observed in the cornfield and spoke to Mr. Donnelly about. The corn is growing in between the rows of corn. And that's what Mr. Donnelly said was going to cause a population issue, which would reduce the population or the production of the corn. While I was talking to Mr. Donnelly, he said the east side of his cornfield of the pivot was the most productive. And I'll explain why that's important on some information later on. So during our survey, we were able to collect 1,329 samples taken from Mr. Donnelly's cornfield by the 5 of us. 8 of those samples were attributed to mule deer damage. 31 samples had no plants in it due to his planting practices of the no-tilling. 19 samples had bird damage. 3 samples had raccoon, 3 samples had wind damage, and 1 sample had blossom rot. And I'll explain to those further here in a few samples as well. So based off of our samples, we calculated 0.6% damage in Mr. Donnelly's cornfield that year. We calculated that by the 8 samples that we located to damage, times 100% damage on each of those plants out of the 1,329 samples. And that came up to 0.6% damage. So get into some of the types of damage. I want to let you know that the pictures that are going to be in the next few slides are not from Mr. Donnelly's cornfields. They're just internet pictures to explain what kind of damage we observed out there. The one that we've seen, the blossom rot and the mycotoxins, it's just a fungus that gets into the corn. I observed personally 1 of them out there, and it can reduce the population of corn. Bird damage, as you can see on the bottom right-hand corner, mainly blackbirds cause this. It gets in there, they take the kernels off, reducing the corn population and production as well. The west side of Mr. Donnelly's field, I spoke to him directly about this, about raccoon damage. These pictures, once again, did not come from his field, but this is what we're looking for when we're surveying and taking samples. The west side of his field was pretty extensive with the raccoon damage. The raccoon damage in the field was corn stalks bent over. As you can see, the raccoons just kind of shred the husks on these and eat the kernels out. The cobs were piled inside the cornfield in big piles. So the west side was pretty extensive raccoon damage. And I explained to him it wasn't mule deer damage because they were piled inside about 20 yards into the cornfield, just in big piles where they'd been eaten. Once again, these the pictures are just for reference. Part of the damage we did see the 8 samples of big game damage. What we observed is the whole entire cob was missing from the plant. The stalk was just there. So more likely than not, it came from mule deer because there's no cob there from the mule deer eating it and knocking it off. We didn't see any stalks broken or anything like that. That's typical more of elk or something that's bigger going through there. The one that we don't have pictures of is wind damage that we also observed in there. That was a concern of Mr. Donnelly's as well. When he contacted me to survey his fields, because he wanted to beat the wind that we had, because he knew his corn was tall and dry. That's one reason he was wanting to get it combined when it was. What we noticed was the corn stalks were bent over. It was all uniform, it was longer segments. It wasn't random corn plants like big game would do, so it was contributed to wind. On November 9th, I emailed Mr. Donnelly the percent damage of 0.6% to notify him of what we calculated. He responded back and say that he disagreed with it. Because of his email response, I offered to meet up with Mr. Donnelly and explain how our process was completed, some of the damage that we observed, and he just didn't want to meet up. One comment that Mr. Donnelly made during our conversation was that I had too many surveyors and we took too many samples of his field. And he believed that created an inaccurate count of his field. So on November 19th, I met with Mr. Donnelly. He advised me he was headed up to his property because he lives in Colorado. He was headed up to his property in Torrington to start his combine harvest. So I met up with him out at his field. I went over the sampling techniques that we do. I showed him our data that we collected, the different surveying samples, and I also offered to walk out to the field and show Mr. Donnelly hands-on what we observed and what we were looking for. Mr. Donnelly did not want to take that up as an offer. During my conversations with Mr. Donnelly, I really didn't have time to mitigate any damage because we didn't have much time frame between the call and the harvest. I offered Mr. Donnelly to sign up for the Hunter Assistance Program, program through the Wyoming Game and Fish that we can get your name for the landowner out for hunters to come in and help assist in harvesting. Mr. Donnelly did not want to do that. One comment that he made is he just wanted his workers, he owns a business in Colorado. Mr. Donnelly wanted the non-residents from Colorado to get tags to come up to hunt the deer on his property. I explained to Mr. Donnelly that was feasible because Hunt Area 15 is a general hunt area for residents, but non-residents, we always have leftover over-the-counter general tags that they can purchase in Hunt Area 15 as well. But he was not interested in that. He said he wanted the type 6 doe fawn license for his workers there because the doe fawn licenses are cheaper to purchase than the over-the-counter general license. So to kind of give you an idea how hard it is to get these non-resident doe fawn license, in 2023, we had 250 licenses available in Hunt Area 15 for the type 6. Only 43 of those licenses go to non-residents. And as you can see, we had 279 applicants apply for those 43 licenses. So it is difficult for people to get it. But I did explain to Mr. Donnelly that I had a list of local landowners or local hunters that were willing to had type 6 license that would have came out if he would have given me some notification. Plus his people could have purchased the license over the counter to go hunt mule deer bucks on his property. So Mr. Donnelly was able to provide me the harvest information map from the combine. He did not get a full weight on any of the corn in his property. So this is the only true and accurate information I had to go off for my damage claim. So the picture on the right there, that's the combine operator's harvest map that he had. What it shows is 129.42 acres were combined by the combine operator. 24,508.27 bushels were harvested. That came out to about an average of 189.3 bushels per acre. Mr. Donnelly was expecting to get 26,259 bushels off the property. So there is a difference there. So I spoke to Mr. Donnelly about his harvest information map. He had a disagreement with the combine operator. I spoke to Rick, who's the combine operator. He keeps his combine calibrated at 56 pounds for corn per bushel. Mr. Donnelly said that he believes he was getting 58 pounds per bushel. He did have some weight slips later on from 3 loads that showed a weight of 60.5, but I never had true weights off of that. So we had to go off of what the combine operator gave us because that was the full extent of the entire cornfield. The 3 loads that Mr. Donnelly did say he loaded off his property, they were weighed. But that came from the east side. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, that was the best production that he had in his cornfield. And that happened to be the 3 loads that he took off the property and weighed. All the other loads were stored on the property in a silo, and he didn't have any weights for those. I did advise him that he could hire someone to come weigh them. He refused and asked if I would pay for someone to come weigh him. I said I had the information I needed off the harvest yield map, and that's what I would go off of. So our damage calculations, we had the 0.6% that I calculated earlier. His harvest yield of the 24,508.27 bushels. So to get the corrected production, we took the 24,508.27 that came off the harvest yield map, divided by the 1 minus 0.6% damage, comes out to 24,656.21 bushels potential yield. That's if there was no big game out there. That's what he would have expected to see. So we subtract those 2 together and it comes up to 147.94 bushels lost to mule deer or big game damage in his field. Mr. Donnelly did have a corn contract to pay out $6.10 a bushel for X amount of bushels. I believe it was about 5,000 or 6,000 bushels. So we gave the contract to him at $6.10, which was higher than the average going, and it came out to $902.43. So all these came off the harvest yield map and the sampling data that we collected. As Mr. Smith said, we were going off, or Mr. Donnelly was going off of previous field claims. He contacted me and asked for them. We supplied those to him. So that's where he was coming up with the 700 bushels that he was requesting in his damage claim. Even though I completed the harvest yield and the surveys, got all that going, he still requests that we went off what he predicted from previous claims. Even though I explained to him that we had the data that I needed, he still refused to go off of what we had and asked for previous deer claims. Mr. Donnelly was provided the hunter affidavit, like I said at the beginning. Mr. Donnelly wasn't too sure how many hunters had been out there. I asked him to do his best. The claim that he turned in had 4 hunters on there. I went through and contacted 1 of the 4. The other 3 did not contact me. 1 hunter that I did contact, he hadn't hunted there on that field in 2023. His brother works for Mr. Donnelly. He had been on the field in previous years, but due to medical issues and everything else, he is from Western Wyoming. He had not come out at all. The other 3 had not contacted me. Mr. Donnelly said a youth was out there and missed a deer, and he believed 1 had been harvested. That's the best data that we got. So on October 1st, 23, Mr. Donnelly did email or send a text message to Warden Supervisor Ellsworth. That's a screenshot of the text message. He did not mention about notifying a deer damage. What it says is this deer was taken this morning on the Torrington farm. Not many deer visible this year, seemed to stay in the canopy of the corn. 4 and 8 feet tall on the hills and 10 or more in the low ground. Lots of tracks in the field and pivot tracks, John Donnelly. As you can see by the text message there, the previous contact to Mr. Donnelly and Warden Supervisor Ellsworth was 2022. So it'd been over a year for any kind of contact. So Warden Supervisor Ellsworth did not take that as a contact of notification as damage either. Due to that, not being notified then, I never had a chance to mitigate any kind of damage on Mr. Donnelly's cornfields. I could have had time to get out there to either haze or get some hunters lined up to go out there to try to mitigate some of the corn damage that was sustained that year, but I never had a chance to. In summary, the method that was used, It was investigated and approved by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. We adhered to the process in this investigation. The degree of damage of big game and percent loss varies every year. Depending on the deer, we had a wet year last year. This year's gonna be different being dry out there. The deer were in different spots than they typically were. We use the sampling method and calculations that are consistent that we've always been doing. And to give a summary of the differences. So one thing that we agreed on, it was 129.42 acres. Mr. Donnelly, he's still going off the 700 bushel claims from previous deer claims that he's provided with the Game and Fish. My calculations came off his harvest yield map that had accurate depiction of what came off that field, along with my surveying and samples collected in 2023. That came up with 6% damage and $902.43 versus Mr. Donnelly's $4,270. So the difference between Mr. Donnelly and the Wyoming Game and Fish will be $3,367.57 for the damage claim. And that's the end of my presentation. I stand for any questions that you guys may have.
So he's trying to, his claim is from yields from previous years. He's saying, I got this before and I need this, I want this now.
He averaged the bushels lost from previous years, and
Okay,
that's what
so-
he's basing.
So did he have, the corn growing in the middle of the rows is called volunteer corn, traditionally doesn't make an ear. It's just sucking up nutrients that other corn won't get that was actually planted. That in itself tells me your yield's gonna be less.
And that's what Mr. Donnelly confirmed to me when I asked about it.
So I don't understand his problem. We've got many things working against him other than the deer. So I'm super good with our $902.43. I don't see any reason to change that at all from what you showed us today.
Any other comments?
Mr. President, I have a question
Go
for
ahead.
Mark. In the sampling of 1,300 samples, and then you have the list of those that were damaged by deer and coons and stuff. I don't understand the sample process. So is a sample a plant? Just you walk along and pick a random plant, determine it's,
So Commission President, Commissioner Brokaw. So when we sample these cornfields, we take approximately 7 steps. We look at that single individual plant right there and evaluate it. Then we go over one row, take another 7 steps, evaluate that single corn plant right there.
Okay.
That way it makes it random throughout the entire cornfield.
and he was the landowner was concerned that you had too many surveyors. Or in that process, you're not injuring plants, causing additional damage. You can walk between the rows and get accurate samples. Is that correct?
No, he's just concerned that we took too many samples and became too accurate.
Okay.
Mr. President, I have one question.
Go ahead.
Why didn't we take any pictures of the raccoon damage? What was,
Mr. President, Commissioner Roberts, it's just not something we always do. It's something we probably should do in the future. But we see raccoon damage in almost every cornfield that we walk with damage, and it's just something that's pretty typical, especially on the outside rows.
And I'm sure you're talking about these samples and stuff. The department has a manual that gives you instructions on how to do these surveys.
Yes,
To follow?
yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments?
Thank you.
Deputy Director Smith?
President Ladwig, it seems as if someone named John may have joined via Zoom. I'm not sure if we know exactly who it is. Are they still there, Larry? Do we have anything other than a first name?
Mr. President, I have a question while we wait for John. Craig, Mr. Donnelly's applied for and received 7 previous damage claims.
Mr. President, Commissioner Brokaw, he requested the last 5 to 7 years of claims, and I think we provided the last 7 years. And so this is basically an annual
Okay.
claim.
Do you know, do you know what those values were that we paid?
I don't have the exact values in hand, but it varied anywhere from, I think, 300 plus bushels in one year to over 1,000 bushels in another year. So it varies year to year, of course.
And those claims were approved and paid as far as you know,
Yes, Mr. President, those claims are all claims that the department investigated and made a recommendation that was acceptable.
based on a.
Based on the
survey.
same survey technique, same fields.
Thank you.
Mr. President, it appears whoever that was is no longer online and available and did not raise a hand. If you don't have, do you have any other questions for me at this
Any other
time?
questions?
I would recommend that the commission vote to approve the partial payment award recommendation for mule deer damage in the amount of $902.43.
Mr. President, in agreement with the department's findings, I move to make the payment of the $902 to Mr. Donnelly.
I will second.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded to approve the department's recommendation to pay this partial damage claim of $902.43, I believe. Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Thank you. Appreciate all your work. Chief Osterlin.
Morning, President Ladwick, Commissioners, Director Nesvik. This morning, I'm going to give you a brief update on the Spies Cool Warm Water facility. We've had lots of meetings so far with the engineering firm, McMillan. A lot of those meetings are concerning the bioprogramming, which is about 90% complete. You might remember bioprogramming is just how many tanks are we going to require in order to raise so many fish, what species those are. They've been working through the building floor plan right now, which includes the office area. Began the septic system modification permit process and completed discussion for isolation room and brood stock room and necessary equipment like incubators, tanks, and et cetera. So all that being said, they've also started into the alternatives phase of the meeting process. So what we want to make sure is we come as close as we can to that projected approval amount that the commission did approve. And so the McMillan is coming up with alternatives as far as if we do this, this is how much it's costs. If we do this, this is how much it's going to cost if we do this. And they've already been doing that somewhat. McMillan is very, very thorough, and they've been giving us lots of information. Some of that information on their thoughts on how the facility ought to be designed isn't what we think is necessary. So we've been whittling it down from there. So we're well on the way. So as you might recall, I mentioned that this phase of the project is going to take about 10 months, which will put us into next year, 2025. McMillan's recommendation, we could start into the bidding process in May or early summer. But they thought that with workload as far as contractors and stuff, it would probably be better as far as the budget concerns, if we put that out towards late summer, early fall for the bidding process, which we tend to agree with. And so that means that groundbreaking could possibly take place in spring of 2026. So things are going well, and I'll stand for any questions you might have.
Are there any questions for Chief? What? No comments, I guess. Thank you for your report.
You're welcome. Thank
We
you.
need to just keep moving on. Item 16.
Thanks, Alan.
Good morning again, President Ladwick, Commissioners, Director. This morning, we're going to give you a presentation from Jeff Glade. Jeff is one of the regional fisheries biologists in Casper, and you've been there since what, 2017, Jeff? And Jeff has done some really great work on the North Platte, or on the Platte River system. Started this work in conjunction with a lot of the concerns we've had about outfitters, commercial fishing pressure. You know, what they were seeing when they were doing their netting was some potential hooking scars, and they wanted to analyze, is it having impact, the amount of fishing pressure that's going on there on the fisheries there. And so they've done some really good work, came up with some really good ways to analyze injury, hooking injury to the trout on the system there, that we've actually expanded to other areas around the state. So Jeff's going to give you a report on what that's looking like, and how they designed the study, and they've did some public meetings to present the data, and he's working on a report. With that, I'll turn it on over to Jeff.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. President, Commissioners, Director Nesvik. So as soon as the presentation loads, I can get going. So over the next 15 minutes or so, I'll do an evaluation summary on how the novel method I developed for creating hooking injury rankings was evaluated across the region in Casper, and also some of the striking results that we found from it and some of the management implications that will come from this. All right, so this, the nexus for all of this evaluation really stemmed from a sampling we did in 2018 at the Miracle Mile, where we just kind of noticed anecdotally a lot of the fish had hooking injuries that were fairly severe and very prominent without having to look at them very closely. And in keeping track of them just on one day, we noticed that about 55% of all of the fish just had some level of injury at the Miracle Mile, and it was closer to about 62% when we did Gray Reef. And that was just in 2018. And also started to get quite a lot more reports from anglers. They were concerned about the level of hooking injury that they were seeing in terms of a qualitative or an aesthetic evaluation of their fishing enjoyment. And it was also around that time that we started to see a lot more social media chatter and news related articles about how much hooking injuries were going on in these popular fisheries around the Rocky Mountain West, but in particular at Gray Reef and the Miracle Mile. So in order to evaluate this, there is no current, there had been no current method for how to quantify a qualitative aspect of hooking injuries. So the objectives of this evaluation were to develop one that had to be quick and unambiguous between the different grades of injury ranks. And then also to then go out throughout our popular regions of tailwater fisheries in the North Platte River and throughout the region to evaluate the prevalence and the distribution of those injuries and any of the biological impacts that they're having on the populations. All right, so I won't make you read all this, don't worry. So I tapped back into my time as a necropsy technician for a veterinary association in Pittsburgh. And I developed an injury ranking that is very similar to how wounds are rated in the veterinary field in terms of coming up with a severity that could be quick, unambiguous, and reproducible by just about anybody with a little bit of training. And to avoid having you read all this, I've used the best 1,000 words as a picture here. So rank 0 will have no conspicuous damage. There won't be any marks in their mouth, any kind of scar tissue or missing pieces off their face or hooks lodged in their bodies. A rank 1, you can see here, there'll be little kind of scars or blemishes on there. These are not thought to be biologically meaningful, but they are evidence of having had been caught in the past. A rank 2 will start to have things that are along the lines of missing maxilla, embedded or infected wounds that are quite large, but there's no impediment to feeding or for the fish's ability to continue to persist. Rank 3 is where we start to get into the biologically meaningful levels of damage. This is where we have ocular or eye damage, start to have infringement on gills, operculum, blindness, or complete mouth like damage in a way that would start to make it so they weren't able to feed nearly as much. And when we get to level 4, we're talking about severe, massive levels of injury, completely dislocated or luxated jaws, split off, and we've had all grades of, these are the fish that ought to be like maybe mercy killed because they're completely unable to feed at this point. So when you put these all together, we end up with the injury ranking. And it's just important to kind of remember some of this picture. When I speak in the future of fish that have any level of damage, that's the combined 1 through 4. And when I say severe to massive or levels 3 and 4, it's just those bottom 2. And that'll come up here next in the results. So for the objective 2 was to go out and sample a wide variety of locations in all of our popular tailwaters. These are reaches that have been very popular for many years, and as of late, they've been extremely more popular. So we've got the Cardwell access between downstream of Pathfinder, between Alcova. We've got the Miracle Mile, which is between Semino and Pathfinder reservoirs. And then I've broken down the North Platte River in the vicinity of Casper, downstream of Alcova, into a series of similar segments in terms of how they are fished and also the population densities that we have there. So these are the striking results. Over the course of about 14 months, we sampled 6,355 trout and ranked them. And in any given site, we reached as high as just about 88% of fish had any level of 1 through 4 injury ranking. And in some of our locations, we had nearly a quarter of all fish were just that level 3 and 4, which are like the more severe to massive levels of injury. Namely, you can see it's upstream of a location, Government Bridge, which is the Highway 220 crossing, which previous evaluations have shown about 80% of all of our angling pressure in the North Platte happens upstream of that bridge.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
So if you go back to that slide. So out of all those reaches, where are there, if there are any special regs regarding artificial flies and lures versus bait? Does it all have a special regulation or only portions of each segment?
Mr. President, Director Nesvik, the Miracle Mile has regulations as to the size of fish can be kept, but it allows any method of bait and or lures flies. The Great Cardwell has a regulation downstream of a vehicle bridge, which allows for the use of flies only, no bait. And then at the Afterbay, it's statewide regulation. Gray Reef would be from Gray Reef to Lusby, so the upper about 7 miles of that section of river is no live bait is to be used. And then downstream, everywhere from like Ledge Creek or about 3 islands down would just be under the statewide regulations with no prescriptive regulation for bait or methods of take.
Thank you.
So as we go on with the results, what we found was that injured fish were obviously significantly larger. Here with the dark blue bands, we have the length frequency or like the number of all fish that we caught. The paler bands are those of injured fish. So with the distribution being pushed off to the side as it is right there, we can see that generally fishermen catch larger individuals out of a population, which would tend to make sense. And that the mode of all injured fish was around 18 inches. And I'll use that here in a second. I won't explain, Fish Chief Osterlin asked me not to go into binomial logistic regressions, but the way that this works is effectively you can use this to calculate the probability of being injured as a fish gets longer. So why we use the mode of that is that is the size that anglers are catching the most often. And when you back calculate it, the probability of a fish being injured at any one site by the most frequently caught length in that location was upwards of 95% at the After Bay, 87 at the Miracle Mile, and then it starts to trickle off a little bit, but it's still 75% at Gray Reef, and then Lower River, where obviously there's less angling pressure and less damage, it's less. And then this is the one, oh, there you go. This one here is body condition is a measure that fisheries managers use often as like a measure of fish health and their ability to persist, reproduce, create quality gametes. And it's an indication of how well they're living in their environment. So what we found is that the condition is significantly less for fish with any level of injury compared to their non-injured counterparts, but that it decreases substantially as the injury ranking went up. And namely for those fish, again, that have feeding impediments from being severely or massively injured. And again, anybody who works with me will tell you that this is what I look like on a normal day. And my wife told me to leave the conspiracy yarn at home because it makes people nervous. So I created a digital version. And what the conceptual model is showing is effectively the population level impacts of these. In fisheries management, we don't tend to quantify things on individual damage or individual aspects of a fish, but as how it's pertaining to the whole population. So when you have 25 or so % of your population is severely to massively injured with lower body condition, you're going to have a population level impact. So as pressure has gone up in the Casper region, with a finite number of fish, we have an increasing number of catch and release events per individual. That leads to a higher chance of hooking injuries, higher levels of stress cortisol. Those compound to decrease feeding efficiency, drive down weight. There's a litany of research that's gone into corresponding lower body condition and increased stress to lower fecundity, which drives your population down even farther. And as the population goes down, and doesn't have any replacements, the age of those individuals get older, they get bigger. That actually has an impact of having it become more prestigious amongst the anglers because the bigger fish are the only ones being caught. And so everybody wants to go there, which repeats the cycle over again to increase pressure. And to speak to that, what we've noticed is over about the past 15 years, we've had a 62% increase in just watercraft related angling at the Gray Reef and Miracle Mile. Guided traffic has nearly doubled to 87% as the last time we did our camera creel and creel survey evaluation, which we are currently repeating again, and we'll have results from that by the end of the year. And one thing that came from that is just amongst boat anglers, they're catching around 59,000 trout a year just at Gray Reef. And where that becomes kind of interesting is that it works out to be about 4,500 fish per mile are being caught, but the population is only 2,500 fish per mile, which means that on average, fish are being caught between 1.5 and 2.2 times a year. And this is exactly the result that we would have predicted from that conceptual model is what we've actually seen. Over time, the number of fish per mile has gone down. When you see a leveling off of the abundance or the pounds per mile, that means that you have an aging population where individuals, as they get bigger, it takes less of them to create the same amount of biomass. And then eventually, when they age out of the population and die off, you get a collapse. So now we have less fish and smaller ones of them as a real world impact of having lower fecundity. So this evaluation being done in Casper kind of begs the question is of, well, if it's this way at Casper, what does it look like elsewhere in the state? So administration tasked other fisheries biologists and supervisors to go through some of their popular regions in the state and quantify it with the same methods that were used for this evaluation at Casper. And what we've effectively found is that most places around the state it's not a problem in any kind of meaningful way. In Casper, you can see the gray bars are the level of fish that have any level of injury, and the red diamonds are just the significant to massive, so just the 3s and 4s. So again, we're in that like 20 to 15% band for significant, but as you go through Cody, those would be like the wetting of the waters, and North Fork Shoshone is fairly low. Jackson has Flat Creek is the taller bar, and obviously that's a very popular fishery, but the methods that their fishermen are using over there, though there are a lot of evidence of injuries, they're not severe to massive, so they wouldn't be biologically meaningful. And as we go over to, you can see there's a taller bar in Sheridan. That is the North Tongue River at a catch and release only site where fish are obligatorily put back. Regardless of level of injury, they have to be returned. But the asterisk above that is a caveat that was based off of a sample of just shy of 70 fish, which in a statistical sense is very low. So. And as for what's next, we've engaged with our INE to go through and do a public education like outreach to try to improve methods of catch and release fishing, so to get the individuals like the angling constituency a better set of methods. Published internal administrative report on all of our results so that other regions can use this. And then we're exploring options through the form of an angler survey this fall to gather information on how the angling public feels about the possibility of pursuing some form of tackle restrictions, terminal tackle regulations, and or area closures. It would be temporary, of course. And with that, I can stand for any questions and.
Mr. President,
Go ahead.
nope. So back on that slide where you had the 4 damages on one slide, that number 4, how was that fish caught?
Mr. President and Commissioner, those fish were all caught using jet boat electrofishing. So we,
How's that fish even alive?
by the skin of its teeth.
Okay, next question. What are there any rules for barbless or barbed hooks?
At this time, currently, there are no barbless regulations in the Casper region or anything for the type of terminal tackle. We do have things such as no bait fishing. Bait fishing has been shown in other areas across the country to be more damaging and lead to more fish mortality. But in terms of damage, it's not been evaluated. But we don't have any in Casper region in terms of terminal tackle barbless regulations.
So with that, I mean, the barbless, of course, is gonna be do less damage. Is that an option to put a barbless only in place?
Mr. President, Mr. Commissioner, it would be on the table. So we have presented in the public kind of information period, we've presented options to the public as to like using barbless methods. In certain sections, like the most damaged areas could be, we could reduce the number of overall flies on a rig. We could go to barbless only. We could reduce it from not being allowed to use lures with treble hooks and only allow single point J hooks. Those are all things that with statutory authority that would be optional for us to use.
Well, this is all something I had no idea that there was that much damage going on with fish in those areas where there's piles of fishermen. It seemed like we ought to do something about that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Sure, Mr. President. Jeff, excellent research, excellent presentation. So as we're not getting our arms around this commercial fishing issue, I encourage you to go through the process you're going through and bring us some recommendations on bait restrictions and whatever we can do. Because your graph of how many fish per mile or pounds of fish per mile loss is going to tank.
Yes, sir.
So, I think I agree with Commissioner Jolovich. That's certainly something the department should bring us a recommendation for some regulation change.
Mr. President, is it possible, do you know of any studies on barbless hooks compared to regular hooks on has anybody done any studies to see what the difference was between the fish? Obviously, there's going to be some as far as, you know, the barbless sections or whatever, smashing down your barbs or whatever. Do you know of any studies that you could rely upon or I could get a hold of to read the difference between the two?
Yep, Mr. President, Commissioner. Yes, there's a lot of research that's gone into evaluating whether or not it causes more mortality. And they have found that effectively barbless hooks tend to cause less mortality simply as a function of time that it takes to unhook an individual. But there's not research out there that I have yet found that quantifies it by injury level. So it's either a mortality or not.
Would it be fair to say that also that might come into play would be the temperature of the water also that would cause more damage to the fish at that certain times?
I can see how increased temperatures in catching and releasing fish, that would lead to higher results of mortality. But I cannot see how a warmer environment would cause more hooking related injury in terms of like the physical mutilation. With the exception of possibly how well they're able to heal. Like the physiological ability for a trout that necessitates under 68 degrees to heal. If it's over 70, it might be able to live, but it would probably be immunologically impaired or physiologically impaired.
Any other questions?
I was gonna do it on my phone, but I'll ask you publicly. One slide with your arrows, fecundity. Fecundity. What's fecundity?
Fecundity is the reproductive potential. It's how many offspring they're able to make.
Okay, didn't know that about a fish. Thank you.
And one other thing, is it possible, Alan, is it possible to, and I don't know, and I usually look through the videos, is for us to produce a fish handling video that might address a little bit, just to get it out into the YouTube world as far as Wyoming game fish. I'm sure we have something in that area, but to do a new version of it, I mean, to address a little bit more of the, you know, the benefits of maybe a barbless hook and benefits of the release on the warm water and the fishing pressure and that kind of stuff.
The last one was 6 years ago on our YouTube channel.
Of course, you would know.
Not to interrupt for Mr.
I'm
Commissioner,
just
Mr.
looking at
President.
it right now.
I have been in contact with one of the videographers, Ray Hageman, to come out this fall to assist us with our gray reef annual population estimate. He's going to come down and do a video. I can certainly incorporate some aspect of fish handling information into that in particular, but if you would prefer one as a standalone update, I don't see why it could not happen.
Yeah, all of it combined, just kind of a renewal of between the pressure, the warm water, the barbless hook, all that kind of stuff together, just to kind of give everything. Thanks. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Very good presentation. Thank you. I recognize Representative Western in the audience. Welcome. Glad you're here. Do we need to?
Yes.
I guess now's the time to do that.
I'd ask.
Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Okay, we have a internet Zoom public comment from Becky Barber. She's not here?
I don't know. I think we should give her a little bit of time I know she really wanted to say something today, so I don't know. Excuse me, Mr. President, sorry.
Eric's gonna call her right now.
She's just his legacy down now.
Chad.
Representative Western, would you have anything to say? Oh. What's that guy sitting next to you? Let's see if we can get Becky on the hook and go from there.
We've lost our.
Oh, good.
Hello? Is she gonna come up on Zoom or just on phone? Okay.
Mark, what you drop this? I know, I'm a mess. Thank you. I know.
Hello?
Hello, Becky.
We're here.
Becky, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, Becky?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Becky, this is President Ladwig. Hello?
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Hi, President Ladwig, Director Nesvik, and members of the commission. I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak. I, of course, I'm with Jester's Legacy, and I just wanted to let everyone know that my group is here. We are willing, able, eager, ready to help any way we can to get, of course, the mandatory training education in place. And of course, we are hoping to get so that you, the commission, can implement setbacks for predators. We understand you already have the control to do that for fur bearers. So this is our hope. We've had a lot of encouraging words, and we would just like to see these two items go to the floor during the legislative session in 2025. So like I say, we've had such great backing, and I believe we've got a few legislators that are on board and ready to help with drafting and doing whatever needs to be done to get things ready to present in that 2025 session. So again, I am so grateful and thankful to all of you. And does anyone have any questions for me?
Anybody have any questions for Becky?
Yes.
Not this time, Becky.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Barely.
At this time, there are no questions.
Okay, that sounds great. Again, thank you. Of course, I've spoke a couple of other times, and that's just what we're hoping for and looking for, and my group is here, and we would love to see a positive outcome on these items.
Well, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure I can assure you that it is being worked on with the subcommittees and the interim committees, and we'll see where it goes when the legislature goes into session this winter.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to speak.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. President, I do have a question.
It's too late now.
I haven't voted to adjourn yet. So when an individual legislature starts a piece of legislation like that and they go through LSO, how soon do those draft bills come out? When might we see that? When could we get eyes on that?
So once an individual legislator asks LSO for a bill draft, I mean, it's usually within a few weeks. However, this isn't going to go through an interim committee, this particular topic. I mean, it was decided that it would not be a part of the interim process. And so I wouldn't expect that the individual sponsor that's been considering this bill draft will even start to work on it until, the fall. And then likely, I mean, I would say that it's probably about a month in advance of the session when we start seeing quite a few bill drafts, because we have to do the fiscal notes on them.
Mhm.
So we see them when they're still confidential and haven't been filed yet.
Mhm.
And so typically that starts in like early mid-December. That's kind of when I would expect it to be public. Now, the legislators that have been I'm only aware of one right now that have been considering this, have expressed their interest in working the draft after the first one's completed by LSO, working the draft with the department. So I expect the department will see a draft, a confidential version earlier than the fall, but the public may not be able to see that till later.
Very good. I was wondering. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other discussion? Anything from the public? Last chance. Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion's been made to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.